All right, Eric, the recording has started. Please introduce yourself and take it away.
Good afternoon. Hello. My name is Eric Orman. I'm a senior PM manager in the Windows 365 engineering team. Some of you might already know me. I just completed a 2-year sabbatical from my engineering role in the EDU space. So I was a technical specialist. I covered primarily California and Hawaii, although I was working in the Northwest alongside Richard Balsley and quite a few others, helping education customers deploy Intune and Office and Teams and doing all of that. And so my 2-year sabbatical ended and I went back to engineering, and I wanted to be on the Windows 365 engineering team. And so I joined that back in July. A week later, they announced the product publicly. 3 weeks later, we launched in GA on August 2nd. A week later, I got promoted to a manager role, and it's been nonstop kind of getting feedback, corralling the team, planning. We just completed this week all the planning that we're going to be doing for the start of next calendar year for the next 6 months. So we kind of finalized our stuff. So we are knee deep in feedback, hearing and listening. So I'll be dropping little tidbits of information and such. So I want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A, the chat. Also unmute and verbally ask questions. We have a full hour. I'm going to take a different approach to this because there's a whole lot of information coming out at Ignite. There's going to be lots of sessions. There's also quite a few sessions that like Scott Manchester, my manager, had presented. So I wanted to not just repeat a lot of stuff. I didn't want to show you slideware. I didn't want to talk about that. I wanted to make this more of a immersive experience because you have my captive time. So with that, I want more Q&A. I would desire more Q&A. I would like to hear your feedback. I would like to hear your complaints, your comments, your moans, your groans, or other problems with things. So that's encouraged. And so I have about 5 slides. That's it. Very short, very condensed in that. And so what I want to do is not spend a lot of time on slides and just go over kind of more or less the deployment of Windows 365 and talk about it. And so I will again weave in various things, talking about future plans and stuff as we go through this. Deploying Windows 365 Enterprise is pretty easy. I summarized it down into 10 steps. And so with that, you can go out and read the documentation. If everyone doesn't know where the docs are, there's an easy AKA for that. AKA just with Windows 365 docs. And that's going to take you out to our documentation site. In here, this is the main landing page. Now, Manuel talked about enterprise and he talked about business. I'm only going to be talking about enterprise because that's where pretty much everyone should be. Business, but I want to talk about the elephant in the room really quick, just for the sake of getting that out of the way. Business is kind of more or less meant for SMBs or small, medium-sized businesses. And the provisioning process for that is super, super simple. It's literally you acquire your Windows 365 business license and you assign it to a user. And that kicks off the provisioning of the cloud PC. And within about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, actually it's longer than that. It's about 60 minutes because you got to complete the licensing assignment, which everyone knows takes a little bit of time. And then we got to pick up that change and then we got to provision this. So it's right around an hour period of time that a cloud PC is ready and a user could go to the office.com and launch that. And that cloud PC is Azure domain joined. So no management needed, but if you have Intune, of course, it will enroll into Intune. So that's the business scenario. We cap it at 300 licenses per tenant. So it's a soft enforcement. It is not a hard enforcement of things. So business, very centered around very easy provisioning. So I'm not going to talk anymore about business, but I wanted to just show you the docs. We have this compare Windows business versus enterprise. You can go read about the business docs, but I want to focus today's sole session on the enterprise. So if you come in and you click this, our docs are loaded. We've gotten rave reviews about these. There's quite a few. I'm going to be coming back to these docs to talk about our roadmap, or AKA what's features in development, and then our what's new. We follow kind of the same process as MEM. They publish their docs in the what's in development for the roadmap. What's new every month is coming out. So there's our docs. Thanks, Manuel, for posting a link in there. So I'm only going to be talking about enterprise today. So let's go back to the slides and kind of talk about those as I progress through these. And again, feel free to unmute your microphone or use the chat to ask questions. So deploying Windows 365 Enterprise is pretty easy. So I summarized it down. But if you go read the docs, there's lots of words. It's like a config manager doc, you know, it's like verbose, it's reading it, but really I wanted to summarize down because it is not complicated. It's actually pretty easy. And that's what I really want to explain today, is just the general steps of it. And this will unlock you to move forward. And Manuel showed you the trick of how to get trial licenses and such. Or if you have a Microsoft account team, you just ask them and they'll get them for you also. So if you're a managed customer, ask your account manager, your TS, your ATS, whoever is in your Microsoft managed account team. In fact, anybody at Microsoft, if you're kind of a customer, you should be able to go out and get those trial licenses. So either one of those ways.
Hey, Eric,
So,
I'll break the ice for you, brother, on asking questions. In the tail end of the other session, right, where we're doing the disambiguation between the three first-party VDI services, a customer posted in the chat as I was showing how to go grab licenses, and I don't know if they were correct or not. I don't know if you saw this. They said that they didn't see Windows 365 Enterprise. They saw business and education. Is that possible, or maybe they were looking at the wrong SKU?
So no, I can tell you why. Because when you look at the subscription portal in the Microsoft 365 admin, there's a little tab up top that says education and business. They need to check. They need to do a search in the business side to get the enterprise.
Gotcha. Okay.
yep. So what he was saying is, you come here, these are the two tabs that they were talking about up at the top. So if you're in the education, you'll notice you will not see Windows 365 along this. But if you click on business, where is it at? Boom, there it is, right there, Windows 365. So you have to click this business tab, and then this one will show up here.
So it's confusing.
No special...
It's confusing because we're telling them don't do Windows 365 business, but we got to hit business to see Windows 365 category, then choose enterprise.
Oh, grief. Yeah, that's true. So, you know, everyone will wonder, oh, so what educational discounts do you get with Windows 365? There are no educational discounts. It's the same cost for both enterprise customers and education. Sorry. So back to the simplified steps. We showed you how to get licenses. The next thing is assign licenses. And then after that, it's really about infrastructure setup. So we got to make sure that hybrid Azure AD join is enabled. Pretty much everyone should be familiar with how to enable hybrid Azure AD join or how to do that. So you're synchronizing users, you got to synchronize devices. That's what hybrid Azure AD join is. And there's a multitude of reasons why hybrid Azure AD join. I'm not going to go into it on this call, but that's something that your technical specialist or others can talk you through. But it's a requirement for this scenario. You have to enable that. Step number 4, you know, create a group. Put your users that are licensed into that group. Later on, you're going to create a provisioning profile specifying that group, and I'm going to walk you through those steps. Number 5, yes, you need an Azure subscription. So you acquire an Azure subscription, you're going to create a virtual network. That virtual network needs to have line of sight networking access to your domain controller, because what we're going to do is create those cloud PCs into that virtual network. They will need to be able to domain join. So that's why they need that networking line of sight access to your domain controller. They'll hybrid Azure AD join. That connector will synchronize it. It'll complete everything. And then it will mem enroll, step number 6. So it will enroll into Intune. Mem, Intune, kind of, I can't figure out. I'll call them the same thing, but I mean the same thing. Mem is Intune, Intune is mem. You'll need to create an on-premise network connection that basically is our watchdog service. It establishes a connection between that VNet and the Windows 365 service. I'll talk about that shortly. And then you create a provisioning profile. Couple clicks, I'm going to walk you through and show you this. It's going to ask you what, a gallery or a custom image, and then you're going to specify a group. And then after that, that kicks off the provisioning. And then there's just, if you want to deploy the security baseline, you could do that, deploy other settings and configurations, or you can instruct users how to access their cloud PCs through the various clients. So let's hop out of this. Oh, actually, I forgot to talk about one thing.
And
let's go back.
I also have a question. I also have a question for you before you leave this area.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The question I was going to ask you was, we've had EU customers say, "Hey, well, you need line of sight to domain controllers. Cool. I have a scenario in which I want to use Azure AD domain services to avoid having to have a VPN tunnel or express route circuit back." What's the stance on that?
Azure Domain Services does not support hybrid Azure AD join. Therefore, this scenario is not applicable for that. We will have Azure AD join, so you can directly AADJ. I want to show you guys that today. That's coming out here at the end of the calendar year.
Perfect.
So that would be the setting for that.
And yeah, so Ian was asking for that future coming feature, right? He wants to do pure Azure AD join. That's coming. But I just want to call out, it's not super clear in the docs that Azure AD domain services is not okay. And so I just want to make sure we called that out.
You know what? I'm going to take that note. We get that occasionally. So using my trusty Post-it note to write down follow-ups. Thank you. That's a great tip. So let's talk about the architecture requirements. This actually trips up most people when I'm talking with them, or just even our field teams, Microsoft teams, is kind of understanding this architecture. So everyone has on-prem, you all have an Active Directory. Well, you need to pretty much go back to your Azure AD Connect. You're already synchronizing users. You need to enable devices to be synchronized, and we call that hybrid Azure AD join. You need to acquire that Azure subscription. You need to create a virtual network in that Azure subscription. That virtual network needs to have a networking line of sight, so a VPN, either a site-to-site or an express route back to your on-prem or wherever your domain controller is in order to perform that domain join. And so that fulfills kind of the architectural requirements. What we hear from our global black belts and our field teams is that in large distributed organizations, probably, like higher ed EDU, you're going to have a team that does desktop management. They're going to be in the MEM portal. You're going to have your networking team. You're going to have your Azure team. You're going to have your identity team. And so you may have to work across very different departments in order to fulfill all of these requirements to actually perform this scenario. So lead time on this might be a little bit long. So that's why it's really important to understand all of these moving parts, so that you can work with each of those departments to get these configured. So that's our architectural requirements. I'm going to recap a lot at the end of this session, more of lessons learned from our early adopters, and also sharing with you some of the insights that we have around, looking at telemetry data of our customers and such. So I'll get to that.
Eric, we had a really good comment in the chat. I just want to bring it up before you left the slide. Is Todd, one of our regulars on Thursday calls, and an AVD customer is calling out, hey, if you're already doing Azure Virtual Desktop, you already got these prereqs. At least the
that's
Azure
exactly
side
correct.
prereqs.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Great point. So let's do some demos. After that, I literally have 4 slides. Oh, the marketing people broke it up into more. It was less. So I have 5 more slides after that. So let's actually hop out and take a look at kind of this. So it's a little bit bigger. So here I am in MEM. Let's go to devices. Let's go to Windows 365. We have our own node in here. So again, went to devices, went to, if you do not have licenses, you're going to get a landing page here. So once you have licenses, it's going to unlock this page. So then you'll be able to see these tabs and everything. But if you have no licenses, you're just going to see like a splash screen here. It's going to tell you a little blurb about Windows 365 and a link to learn more. But once you get licenses, then it will unlock this screen for you. When you unlock this screen, the first step that you'll want to do is come up to on-premise network connections. And I already have one configured here, but let me walk through creating one really quick. Basically, you could name it. It's going to then pop down a list of your Azure subscriptions. Now, I'm logged on as Eric at duvalschool.onmicrosoft.com. I have to have access, that account has to have access to an Azure subscription with, I can't remember it's like a certain role, but just you have to have access to that subscription in order to see. This is actually one of the top call drivers that we get, is people come in here and they don't see any Azure subscriptions, and they don't realize that the same user account that they're logged into MEM needs to have permissions on an Azure subscription, because we're querying Azure. So once you get those permissions, you're going to see a drop-down list of all of the Azure subscriptions that you have access to. You could select your resource group in here. You could select your virtual network that you created. So there's some pre-work that you have to do. So in order to set all of this up, you had to go back into Azure and create a virtual machine and set all of that up. So of all of those topics that I did before, then you pick your subnet and everything in here. You click next, and that's going to create an on-premise network connection. So what is an on-premise network connection? Let's walk and look in here. So what happens during that is we do a lot of checks to make sure that the environment is properly configured. So we will check and verify that a hybrid Azure AD join is enabled, the Azure subscription's valid. There are various checks on the virtual network. We're going to do some IP and URL checks. We're going to do some DNS checks. We have quite a few more checks that are coming over this next, within the next 6 months. We're going to be checking, making sure the service connection point, the SCP, is there. We're going to be checking to make sure that Intune is properly configured, and co-management and all of these others. But for right now, these are the checks that we have. And the whole point and purpose of these checks is to make sure that you have a successful first-time experience and continued experience provisioning. Because if we didn't have these, there's so many moving parts. It's going to be a troubleshooting, a support nightmare trying to figure out, hey, well, is it because of this configuration in Azure? Is it this DNS issue? And so you continue to try and try. And so the whole point of this is to actually make sure that you have a first-time experience that's good. You cannot provision cloud PCs unless all of these pass. So if one of these fails, we will block provisioning, which is great, because we know that if one of these is bad, then it's going to result in a failed provisioning of a cloud PC. So why even try? So we block provisioning if any of these fail. A couple of things behind the scenes of this. Some of these checks are at our service level, but some of these checks are actually what we do is we deploy a VM, domain join it, and then perform some checks. That's how we can do some of these. So if you were to look in your Active Directory in the OU that you specified, so as part of creating this on-premise network connection, is you need to also give what your DNS domain is, what OU, and then a username and password, because that's actually what's going to be performing the domain join. So what you're basically saying, hey, in this VNet, that's where I want you to deploy your cloud PCs into. What is the DNS name? An OU if specified. I didn't specify an OU, so it's just going to go into the computer's OU, because that's the default one. But if you specify it, and then what username and password do you want to use in order to perform that domain join? So big key items out of that is that OU. Make sure we have probably one of our other biggest support case volume is people are creating an OU or reusing an existing OU, and there are various GPOs that are causing problems. So I would encourage, as part of your POC pilot, to consider creating a net new OU and really understand all of the group policies that you're targeting towards that OU. Same thing as when you do AVD. There's certain probably group policies that you're targeting or not targeting towards your virtual desktops versus your physical endpoints. Same thing here.
Eric, I want to give you a +1 on that. Big, huge call out, right? There's an ability to actually block inheritance in that GPO inheritance in that OU, right? And that might not be a bad idea for your POC. In the AVD days, I'm telling you guys, we've seen, for example, a domain-wide policy blocking remote desktop RDS services. Well, if you block remote desktop services, and the cloud PC can't let the remote desktop connection come in when the end user tries to connect, and so it kills AVD. It'll kill cloud PC as well. So just one of those things. If you're in a large enterprise, you got 20-year legacy of GPOs. It may be smart to block those GPOs at that OU just to make sure everything's working right, and then bring in the GPOs you want. Or just adopt Intune Mem, right? Maybe that's better.
Yeah, that's another way. So this is the on-premise network connection. There are a bunch of checks. You also define your properties for doing that. One of the other things that we also see is this username and password. So I think by default, it's either 10 or 15. A user account has the ability to domain join like 10 or 15 devices to a domain. You want to make sure that you give this account those superpowers so it can do more than that. That's another help desk, not help desk, but a support driver is they're seeing failures, and it's basically because this count has reached its maximum amount of allowed domain joins. So make sure you go and adjust that on that. DNS issues is another one that we often see also. So in the event that these checks are failing, oftentimes it's this endpoint connectivity check where we're doing URL checks, or some of these others, maybe hybrid Azure AD join. Actually, that's probably get the biggest help desk. The easiest and best way to troubleshoot is create just a normal VM into that VNet, RDP to it, and then attempt to do pings, attempt to do a manual domain join, troubleshoot it from that VM. So again, deploy a VM into that virtual network, RDP to it, and attempt to perform manual checks and verification. That is probably the easiest way to do troubleshooting on here in terms of things. So that's the OPNC. Kind of any general questions? I want to take a moment of pause and just give people time, like to unmute your microphones. Or is people following? Are you kind of lost, or any further questions? So I'll take a minute of pause here if you guys want to unmute your microphone. Or keep going.
If folks aren't unmuting, we did have some good questions that were asked in the IM. I can review some of those with you if you'd like.
Oh, we could. Yeah, we go those at the end. I think they've been answered,
Yeah.
but I wanted to just make sure people had an opportunity to verbally ask questions on this. All right, cool. Well, let's march on. So after you get your on-premise network connection configured, the next thing you want to do is go and create a provisioning profile. So let's go and name this. So I'm going to go and create it high ed. You give it a description, and something new that you probably, some of you have never seen, which pretty much should be all of you until the Ignite videos come out, is this new option for Azure AD join versus hybrid Azure AD join. We only have the hybrid Azure AD join scenario today. Coming later this year, early next year, will be the Azure AD join scenario. So let's talk about this hybrid Azure AD join first, because that's what I'm focusing on. So in here, you'll pick an on-premise network connection with that scenario. So what's really important with this is your cloud PCs will be deployed into the virtual network and all of that Azure infrastructure that you created. So if you choose to have that virtual network in West US 3 or West US 2, or in Asia or Japan, that's where your cloud PCs are going to be provisioned into. So you get to decide where your cloud PCs are going to reside. And again, all of that is based upon that virtual network that you configured, that on-premise network connection that establishes a relationship between Windows 365 and that Azure subscription. Let's talk about the Azure AD join, because this is hot right now. You'll be able to choose two options with this. You'll be able to choose an on-premise network connection. We haven't wired that up yet in the UI. That's actually, they're doing that right now. But what you'll also be able to do is a hosted network. So you do not need an Azure subscription with this option, which is pretty awesome. So then you can pick your data center that you want to deploy into. So you want to do West US 3. By the way, they haven't posted that in the what's new is we now support West US 3. I know Richard had been asking me about that one. So you could pick this and you could move on with your provisioning policy. Actually, in fact, there's nothing really, so we'll just continue to go on. Any questions about that really quick? Pretty straightforward. I'm most excited about the hosted network because it frees up the opportunity, not opportunity, but it frees up, you don't have to manage a VNet. But if you want to add a VNet, because there are people that want to have a virtual network because they want Azure AD joined resources in a VNet so that it has networking line of sight to their other resources that they have, that will be possible also. We just haven't hooked it up in the UI here yet. So you'll get your choice, either or, hosted network or bring your own VNet. That will be coming. So let's just move on.
Hey, Eric, sorry, just to disambiguate one of the use cases, right? We mentioned earlier in the review of the 3 solutions that if the customer is injecting the VNIC into their own VNet, then they control things like egress, right? So if they want to have a firewall online, they can do that. If you choose this new option of a Microsoft hosted network, I presume that is no longer on the table, correct? Because you're not injecting into the VNet.
Yeah, those cloud PCs are in a Windows 365 VNet, so we create a special VNet just for that deployment. We don't share VNets with others, so we'll create a dedicated VNet for this provisioning profile that those cloud PCs will be deployed into, and you have zero control of that VNet. So no firewall rules, nothing. Think of it as like those cloud PCs are like on a home network or some network disconnected.
Gotcha. Perfect. So if we think about, if you want private network line of sight to, it's not just DCs, right? It could also be like we're talking about like SQL Server on premises or some line of business application with a private endpoint on premises. I guess you could envision a possibility in which, a customer is still going to do the connection to the VNet, not so that they can do a hybrid join anymore. Let's say in the future you support Azure AD join, whatever, but they want to actually backhaul to some endpoint on campus, or they want to do egress filtering for internet egress out of that VM. That's something they can do by still connecting to an Azure VNet, right?
Yeah, you could choose that VNet. You have an either or option.
Cool. More options, better.
Yep. So the next thing, whether you choose hybrid or Azure AD join, the next option is around image. I could choose a gallery image, which is awesome. These are cloud optimized images. In here, Windows 11, we pre-bake M365 apps into that one, or we've got, different flavors and versions all the way down to 1909, 2004, 20H2, 21H1. Why this says 21H2 and it's a Windows 11, that's a bug. I don't know why they didn't fix that yet. It should be fixed. But either way, it's Windows 11 on that particular item. Let me I want to spend some time talking about gallery images here. These gallery images we call them cloud optimized because we have made some settings. You can go read the docs about what settings we've made. We've added M365 apps. Every month we update these images with the latest software updates. So after the patch Tuesday came out, so just recently we updated the images all to have these last week's patch Tuesday updates. Next month, we'll update the images again. So when you're provisioning cloud PCs, they're not going to be using like when 20H2 came out, and those cloud PCs will have to be updated. They will be provisioned having the latest software updates as effective the current month or the previous month's patch Tuesday for Office and also Windows. There's a couple of other settings that we put in there to make it cloud optimized. We document those, but think of these as very similar to what, in this deployment process of Autopilot. A lot of people should be familiar with Autopilot in the sense of the value proposition of Autopilot is you don't create custom images. You get a vanilla OEM image. You tell Dell, Lenovo, Microsoft, hey, for these new devices that you're getting, I want a vanilla image. And when that device arrives on campus, then you unbox it, you boot it, It's going to ask you language, keyboard, network, and UBI. You're going to sign into that device. And during that provisioning process, Intune MEM is going to transform that device by layering on top of it settings and configurations and applications. We think about Cloud PC provisioning in the same way as Autopilot. We encourage customers to use gallery images and then use MEM to layer on settings and configurations, because at the end of the day, a Cloud PC should be managed in the same way as a physical PC. Cloud PC should be managed in the same way. So they should be provisioned in the same way. Custom images are supported, but so I can choose a custom image. I have not imported any into this. So the process of creating and importing is you need to upload to your Azure storage, and then it will actually, because of that OPNC connection, will show you what images are in your image library in Azure, and you'll be able to import those in. But I will say the use case for custom images is very niche. The only one that I really found thus far has been complicated applications or very large applications that customers have to install. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time on that, especially that custom images of you're going to create it, you're going to put it here, and then next month it's out of date. In fact, it's probably out of date within 30 days. You're going to have to go and create it and redo it. So the value prop of gallery images is they're always up to date, and you're layering on those settings. Custom images, you're going to have to update them, because imagine you fast forward 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and you haven't updated that custom image. What's the problem? They're 6 months out of date with their Windows updates. So the first time a user launches that Cloud PC and that 6-month-old custom image, they're going to have 6 months worth of software updates in order to install for Windows and Office or whatever else. It gets outdated really, really quickly. So moving to a more agile and dynamic way of layering your applications and settings is why we encourage more aligning with that autopilot way, as opposed to creating these custom images. Again, these are dedicated devices, just like a physical PC. So the need to have custom images, you don't have multi-session where you have to have custom images, or you have to have, and they get cloned for each session. These are one-to-ones. So layer on, be dynamic. It's going to save you time. If you don't understand how to use MEM, partner up with your desktop admins. And in fact, there's some pretty cool scenarios that I'm working on for this next calendar year that'll actually make this experience even a whole lot easier. So anyway, any kind of questions about that? Because I just threw a whole lot of information at you guys. All right, I guess everyone.
Quiet crowd
So,
today.
yeah, so gallery image, select, next, oops. Assignments, here we go, pick a group. So go ahead and pick your group. Again, this group is, probably a group that you created and you assign licenses to. These are your licensed users for Cloud PC. You select next, and it's going to go and provision all the, you can select multiple groups if you want to. Now, something that I want to call out here is there's a couple of nuances with this. Is a user can only be in one provisioning profile. A user can only have one type of Windows 365 license assigned to them. So if you pick, whatever license that you have. So if I'm back here, whoops, clicking all over the place. So here we are. I've got this Windows 365 Enterprise 2-core 8 gig. I've got these, 94 test licenses up here. Yeah, I kind of get a lot of them. I can't have, Eric have 2 of these same licenses assigned to him. That's not going to necessarily work on that sense. You can have different licenses. So if I had a 4-core or however, then you're allowed, but they can't be the same license type. That's not allowed. So they have to be different. That's a caveat. Whoops, over here. The other is you can only be in one provisioning profile. You cannot be in multiple ones. So if you have, a 2-core license assigned to you, and if you've got a 4-core license assigned to you, you're in the same provisioning profile. 2 Cloud PCs will be created for you. One for that 2-core, license and one for that 4-core license. But you can't be in 2 provisioning profiles. I wish we called it out a little bit clearer in the docs. We should probably make that a little bit clearer, but that trips up some people also. All right, that kind of concludes, because after you create the provisioning profile, that invokes the creation of the Cloud PC. And so you can come up here to all Cloud PCs and you can watch. These statuses will come in here and state provisioning. And again, it takes about, the better part of probably an hour, because what's happening under the covers is kind of 5 steps within the provisioning. Cloud PC, our service is going to orchestrate the creation of the virtual machine. It's then going to orchestrate the domain join of that virtual machine. So it's deployed into that virtual network. Let me go back to those slides. It's probably a good time to kind of come back to those particular slides that I had here. So here's our design. Let me fast forward through this. So we're going to deploy that Cloud PC into the virtual network that you selected. Then we're going to orchestrate the domain join of it. So it's going to communicate back through that site to site, back to on-prem, perform the domain join. And then we got to wait for hybrid Azure AD join to kick off. So that means that it's being synchronized, that device object, up into Azure Active Directory. Once the hybrid Azure domain join process registration completes, then MDM enrollment will happen. And then the 5th thing is we'll install the AVD session host on that and do some other final configurations. And that's kind of the 5 steps. So VM creation, domain join, hybrid domain join, Intune enrollment, final configurations. Those are the steps of provisioning. So if you think through that, you kind of have a firm understanding of kind of the flow, as I often will say, how the water flows through the pipes. And you'll be able to monitor everything here. And once that's all done, then what it really allows the end user to do is, you can come out here and go to office.com. Once that provisioning is fully completed, about to Windows 365, and you'll be able to see your Cloud PCs that are available here. So once provisioning completes, then that's when they will show up here in the portal and allow you to launch them. There's some other pretty cool things in here. You can invoke a restart. You can rename it. You can do some troubleshooting. These are actually checks that we actually do on the client, some connectivity checks. And you can see some other system information that's on this also, which is pretty cool. So these troubleshooting connectivity checks are pretty neat in the sense of our service will check to make sure that the AVD session host is running and it's properly configured, and do quite a few other checks on that particular device to make sure that it's capable of being remoted to. If you want to use non-Windows clients, then you click up here, and that's where you can get the subscription URLs for iOS and Android and Mac, and download the other clients and such. So that's a good way of doing that. So I've been using the web experience here. We support all the same clients as AVD. In fact, we use the AVD client. One of the things that you'll notice, and you'll probably see also in, let me hop over to my other one. This is where my Microsoft. We are doing some fancy things around our browser client. I want to show you this because the experience I showed you launching one of them is quite unique. So we've actually soon, here's my Azure AD join. This is in my Microsoft tenant. We've been test driving this out to see if this works. Oh, we don't have this enabled. Oh, we didn't get that one enabled. It's in my other one. Well, as you saw, there was the experience of, see this kind of access local, this is very AVD-ish, as you could see it. We have this same kind of experience here. Well, we have enhanced this experience significantly in providing a more curated experience see if I can. We've actually rewritten the browser client. It uses the AVD APIs, but we're adding some other capabilities that are enhanced above the AVD in terms of our browser client. So is this the right one? Let's check to make sure. Yep. So you'll notice it's a different background. We kind of have these different views in here. This is just some early things that we're working on. You're going to see more of this. We call this our Ignite Hot client. You'll see this come out in our Ignite videos, and we'll be talking more about that. But we've written a special web client just for Windows 365. You're able to connect up, and it works the same, but we're adding in some more capabilities. So the look and feel of it, you'll first notice is different, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes of this. So I wanted to just give you an early teaser of our new client so that you'll have an understanding of kind of things to think about and watch at our Ignite sessions. So that's the client experience. I've kind of gone through all of that. I have a couple more slides that I want to go through, primarily kind of talking about the insights, best practices, and observations. Any general questions? Got 15 minutes.
I think we got some good points to reinforce here that came through the chat, right? Is that these virtual machines, the cloud PCs, they run in Azure, but they don't run in your Azure subscription, right? So if you choose to connect to your VNet, then the object you will see in the Azure portal for management is this VNIC object, but you're not going to see the VM. And so I think it's something you talked about, but in the chat, we see it coming up where people are like, oh, clarifying. That's right, the VMs don't exist in your Azure subscription. They're injected in to the VNet if you choose to enable that.
Yeah, Brian, I would like to know why I'm depressing you.
There was also a couple of comments passed earlier on about the do not assign licenses via group, assign them directly, which goes against everything else that we tell customers to do, and it assigns licenses.
Yeah, the reason for that is when we do a resize action. So, oh yeah, that was the other thing I didn't show. So let me walk through that.
And will that be addressed so that we can?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
It's not addressed over the weekend, but it is addressed. It'll be next calendar year that we'll be doing that. So when you have these cloud PCs, let's go and look at them. This is important. I totally spaced over this, so it reminded me. So here's all of my devices within MEM. A cloud PC is just like a normal PC, so it's alongside all my other physical PCs. You'll notice that it says CPC. Yes, we will have a custom name template, very similar to what we have for Autopilot for your cloud PCs coming next calendar year. So in the meantime, you're more or less stuck with our naming scheme. When you click on it, you're going to notice that the remote actions are different. So up at the top, you don't have retire, you don't have wipe, you don't have those. We've changed those for a cloud PC because those are toxic actions for a cloud PC. So instead, we removed those and we've added reprovision and resize in terms of that. So let's first talk about resize because that's where the question was. You know, one of the cool things about a cloud PC is we have the ability to resize it. So you don't have that ability with a physical PC. You can't just say, hey, I've got this old Surface Book and now I want to like make it new and zippy and give it more power. But with a cloud PC, you can purchase another license, and through here, this reassign, you could say, hey, I got this, you know, about an 8-core license, and I can actually go through a resize. What happens on the back end of a resize is it's not super, like, we're not adding on a special sauce. All that we're doing is, so you had that, whatever you specify here is we'll do a licensing exchange. That's why we tell you to do direct licensing assignment. If you ever want to do resize, then you need to have direct licensing assignment. If you're never going to do a resize, then group-based is okay. But when the resize, the action that happens is we do a licensing switch. So imagine you have what do you have today? Well, doesn't it says PC Cloud Lite, but imagine that's a 2-core, and then you come in here and you decide you want an 8-core. We will orchestrate the action of removing that 2-core license and assigning the 8-core license. That's why we don't support group-based licensing, because with group-based, we can't do that licensing exchange on the back end of that. So that is the reason why we encourage you to use direct assignment. But understanding that if you never use Resize, then group-based is totally fine. And then what happens after that licensing exchange, we power down the VM. And just like on a Hyper-V server, like I have sitting here, we go in and we change like the number of cores, we go and change the RAM, and then we expand the disk, and then we reboot it, and the Cloud PC is operating at that new 8-core. So no real magic sauce, special sauce that we're doing. It's a licensing exchange. It's a restart with changing VM properties. That's what a resize is.
Brian has his hand up. Brian?
Yeah, I'll come off mute. So I wanted to chat a little bit more about the 2 provisioning profiles issue. So so let's imagine in some idealistic future where all of the issues with Intune are solved for this sector. And by that, I mean the scope tagging issues, the RBAC issues, the lack of good device group delegation issues, and the lack of the ability to set administrators on devices, and the sort of poor capabilities that you have in Intune. So let's imagine all those problems are solved, and we have users, of course, in this sector who belong to multiple departmental IT units. That's just a fact of this environment.
Yep.
And so what you're telling me about these provisioning profiles is that if 2 of these Intune delegation scopes assign a provisioning profile, all of a sudden the user's got a problem.
Yes. So I would be curious to understand why, like, the provisioning profile does 2 things. It allows you to pick an image, and it allows you to pick kind of the join type, hybrid or Azure AD join. Would you imagine with those 2, you would have different provisioning profiles? Like, would you really determine like, okay, well, John's going to get a hybrid join, and we also want him to have an Azure AD join and a different image? Like, are those 2 real important needs? Like, I guess I'm just trying to figure this out and tease out.
Yeah,
it's a great question. So I'm just dialoguing. That's it.
Yeah, no. And when we launched our autopilot service, one of the very first questions we got was, can we create our own image? And with our central managed server workstation service, that is one of the things that particularly some of the larger departments want, is the ability to have a custom image. And so, yeah, I do think that this would be something that would come up.
Well, and not even then, as an IT administrator, if at some point in the future, like Brian says, all the things around Intune get sorted, and our org decides that I no longer get a piece of hardware, and I only get a VDI for my daily driver for email and for browsing, right? And so I get a Win365 VM, and that's great. And now Windows 11 has come out. And now somebody has to vet and test Windows 11, right? So now that's a different provisioning profile that I can't use my daily driver ID for, right? So now I either have to give up my existing Windows W365 PC to get a Windows 11 one and rebuild all of the things in that Windows 11 VM, right? Or, I mean, what do I do? How do I? Yeah,
I had to make you say it. Like, I can't just give you all the scenario. So listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very valid. Yep.
That's one.
Well, I think that probably what's more common for us is like if engineering has a custom image with some heavy software applications in it, and then the faculty staff member works in another department, say LAS, where they have a lighter VM that they want to provision for different purposes. Well, they can't necessarily do both if they fall under the same license.
So again, back to that one, I hear what you're saying, but you would probably start with a vanilla image and then layer on the applications dependent upon the needs of the particular user, as opposed to starting with a custom image on that. I'm challenged, and so what I'm doing is I'm challenging the need to have a custom image in that scenario, where you could just have a gallery image, provision those two users, and then you do machine or user-based targeting through MEM with its applications in order to reach your desired end state.
Well, I mean,
as opposed to spending time creating a custom image and going through that process of everything, because creating a custom image really isn't going to help solve. It's going to shorten the provisioning time, but by not a whole lot for the most part. It's really that initial setup. It's not like a physical device, because that device, you configure a cloud PC, it's going to sit there running 24/7 on Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. It's going to have all of its applications come Monday morning, or even within 8 hours, it's going to have all of those applications installed on that. So that's the way I look at that one, is I'm discouraging and challenging the use of custom images.
Yeah, I mean, I can't exactly dictate how engineering decides to manage their endpoints or package their applications.
That's the other thing about this space, right? Is that universities, by and large, are, and I've said it in other sessions this week, where large conglomerates of separate business units with separate sectors and needs, all masquerading as or under a university banner, right? So like Keith says, engineering is different from liberal arts, is different from fine arts, is different from athletics, but there are users at universities that exist in all those different verticals. And so if athletics decides to do a Windows 365 PC, and natural science decides to do one, and now you've got somebody in kinesiology that spends time in both athletics and natural science, well, so now they have to pick which VM they get, right? Which policies they get and all that. So that's hard for us, for this group of people.
Cool. Well, Todd and Brian, are you guys all on the high ed distro, the email distro?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I'm going to follow up on that with a couple of things. I wrote down your names, and I want to get some more information in terms of the feedback on that to solidify kind of these scenarios, because there's two things I'm actually looking at for next semester, and I need use cases for those. And that's around allowing users to have multiple of the same licenses assigned to them. Second is a user is allowed to be in multiple provisioning profiles. And I want to follow up with you on some of the use cases. I wrote them down, but I want to just get them a little more succinct and clear, so that way I can add them back to our engineering requirements. So I'll follow up with you guys more on that. Great stuff. For the sake of time, I know we've got this left, and I've got a couple of slides, and I'll kind of zip through these because I've talked to a lot of these ad nauseum. And so I talked about, one of the questions that we get a lot is, well, provisioning is taking a long time. Well, I explained that there's a lot going on in the back end, like those 5 steps. And what we see in terms of our service telemetry data is that hybrid Azure AD join is the #1 failure of the OPN sync checks. So customers are not configuring hybrid Azure AD join, or they're not selecting the OU to be synchronized, or the service connection point, the SCP, has not been properly configured, or it was blocked at the time. So just troubleshooting hybrid Azure AD join is probably the biggest challenge that we see in terms of support and failed OPNC checks. The next biggest one is around the domain join. And I already talked about that. If the user doesn't have permissions in order to domain join, or they've run out of the number of tries, that's kind of the next bigger. The other ones are kind of big, numbers like 11, 12%. And those are mainly like new people setting it up. It's like one-time checks that they failed. And then Azure subscription is valid. That's like me. I have $150 stipend, and sometimes I go over that and then my Azure subscription gets in a failed state, and then I'm blocked on provisioning. So, but when all those are good and running properly, provisioning should take like 60 minutes. If it's taking a lot longer than that, then there's something problem. Forgot to mention one of the other I'll get to it in the next slide. So here are the top causes of why provisioning, and for the sake of time, I'm just gonna kind of zip through these. I've talked about all of these except for the second one. So by default, Azure AD Connect has a sync cycle of every 30 minutes. If you've made that sync cycle like 2 hours, every 2 hours or every 8 hours, then that's going to cause that provisioning to take longer, because that hybrid join relies upon that sync cycle. So if understanding that sync cycle plays a huge important role in completing this provisioning process. The other stuff you guys are super smart, you've already picked up on. I've already covered the provisioning phases. Here's some tips, user screen capture tool to capture these. These are all kind of well-known things, but I've talked about all of these, especially the last one. The best and easiest way to troubleshoot is to create just a generic VM in that virtual network, RDP to it, and do manual testing. I've already kind of gone over the top speed bumps numerous times. Getting the most out of your PC, a lot of that stuff is well known. If you have E3, A3 license, you get unlimited OneDrive. Known folders is the best way to keep files synchronized between your physical and your cloud PC. When a device is Azure domain joined and hybrid Azure domain joined, you don't need KMS. And then use M365 apps. Those are kind of key things about squeezing the juice out of that A3 license that you have. Calls to action. There's going to be a lot of videos at Ignite. I think we've got 6 videos specifically on Windows 365. I did a session on getting started. Much of what you saw today is in that session. It just perfectly aligned with this presentation we had today. I do want to call out in the bottom right, we have public forums, we have our roadmap, we have our feedback site, and we have our docs. Those are the best ways to maintain engagement. I'm also on that high ed distro, although I stopped monitoring it about 3 months ago when I left the EDU world. I should go back and start looking at it a little bit more. But I do troll that and looking and listening to feedback on that particular distro. There's some great stuff out there that you guys share. So Manuel, Steve, Richard, and Rich, I meet with them. We have a group chat. We're always talking. So if you guys have feedback, proxy it through your account teams. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn. However, our real goals is to help you, enable you to deploy Windows 365. So I want to say thank you for allowing me to come and talk and present and give you guys information. So I'm going to hang out a little bit longer. I don't have anything after this. So if you want to ask questions verbally, I could show you stuff. I could talk about things. This is your time. So I want to make sure I maximize that. But this has been a great session, and I hope you guys got something out of it. Thank you again, and go Jacks.
Thanks, Eric. Just a quick word. I had a couple people try to access the recording from within Teams in the last session. All session recordings are going to be posted to YouTube, and the agenda site where you got the link to the meeting is going to have the recording posted there. Both Eric and Manuel, if you don't mind sharing your decks out with me so we can get them posted there, we can do that. I'm going to stop the recording at this time.